Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Nowicki. I'm here with my usual partner in thought crime, Colin Liddell, and also joined this time by our fellow traveler, Matt Forney. And today, Colin, Matt, and I are going to be talking about the decade past. That is the 2010s, which by the time you're hearing this, I imagine they will have come to a definitive end. But the time we're recording this, there's still officially a few more hours, a couple more days, depending on where you are in the world, left in the 2010s before we move into the Roaring Twenties. So Colin thought it might be an interesting idea to do a retrospective on what has taken place over these past 10 years. We had the aughts, and now we're coming to the end of the tens. The teens, whatever I guess you want to call it. So what would be a good place to start, Colin, since this was your idea? Where do you think we should take this conversation first?
Well, quite a lot happened in the teens, so there's lots of events. So I think we should be kind of looking at it in terms of various kinds of patterns and trends, and then kind of slot in, events and incidents into that as we come to them. So, the I guess one of the things that defines the teens or the 20-teens is the kind of growing influence of social media. That's one of the things that really sticks out about this departing decade. And with social media, we've seen a couple of other trends. One of the things I've noticed in recent years is like almost half the news stories that actually appear in newspapers and on TV news are in some way related to things that people said on Twitter, and people usually overreacting to that and getting very, very hysterical about it. And so I think, we've seen a radical change in social organization, due to Twitter, rather than thanks to Twitter, because I think it's something of a curse.
Yes, that's true. We've definitely seen social media play a larger role, for better or for worse. Maybe we would say mostly for worse. Although everything's a double-edged sword to a certain extent. Maybe we can talk about that. But okay, so we've over the 2010s we've seen the rise of social media, and of course we've had the three of us. Have all had our share of deplatforming woes. I think we are all of us banned from Facebook now, which was where the social media site that I guess being a Gen Xer and not young and hip, it's my understanding, from my kids that nobody really gets on Facebook. Nobody's on Facebook anymore, under the age of say 25 or so. But for me, it was sort of
generous. I'd say maybe 35.
35. Yeah, so it's an aging site. But anyway, Matt, what are your thoughts about what Colin had to say about social media? But also, if you have any other thoughts about trends that we've seen taking place over the course of the last decade that's coming.
Well, social media is not just the important trend, but also the increasing corporate control and censorship of the internet, which was totally unheard of 10 years ago. I mean, it feels like 10 years, but it feels like to me it could have been 100 years. Back in 2010, you didn't have to worry about being banned from Twitter, Facebook, payment processors like PayPal, Patreon. You didn't have to worry about getting deplatformed by your bank. If you said something online that certain people didn't like. That's, I think, is the most important thing. We've seen, prior to the advent of social media, I mean, obviously we had, Facebook, Twitter, all got started in the mid-aughts, but it didn't really become super important until this decade. Prior to that, information on the internet was mostly disseminated through private websites, blogs, email, news lists. It was very, decentralized. Such concepts as like RSS readers and blog rolls, stuff that younger kids have no idea what that is, because they get all the information from Twitter or another social media network. And because social media has become so dominant, that means that the companies that control that social media basically have not total dominance, but near total dominance of what goes out on the internet. The whole promise of the internet, at least that's how it was sold to us, or at least that's how it was sold to me back in the mid-aughts, was that, you had the freedom to do whatever. You had the freedom to express yourself, get your ideas out there. With self-publishing on Amazon and stuff, you could even publish books and products without having to go through a corporate middleman. But that doesn't really exist anymore. It does to a certain extent, but you have to constantly worry like, oh, is Twitter going to ban me for this? Oh, is PayPal going to ban me for this? Oh, is Amazon going to take my book off because it has content they don't like? We've seen the internet effectively be gentrified. The sort of the Wild West, it was dying in the aughts, the whole Wild West aspect of the internet, where you could just find all this crazy stuff, all these, and not just like out there dissonant ideas, but like really weird stuff, the really weird side of human expression, something like, I don't know, Goatsy or Blue Waffle. That's all gone now. The internet's been gentrified. It's been made safe for affluent white liberal females, soccer moms, trans kin, trans otherkin, basically people. The internet has been corporatized. That's the biggest trend. I think is the most important thing that's happened this past decade.
But here's the other side of that, and maybe we can talk about this as well. I mean, when I was thinking back on trends of the last decade, I didn't have social media in mind specifically, but I did think of the general trend of censorship and deplatforming, which of course is related to social media and corporate control of the internet, as you say, Matt. But the concurrent or concomitant trend, what has gone hand in hand with this increasing amount of censorship and deplatforming and such, is the rise of dissident thought generally, or what used to be thought of as dissident thought, specifically the rise of nationalism. If we want to look for the good and the bad, every action has a reaction, it seems to me. Here's my take on why we're seeing this attempt to gentrify and censor and gosh, what was there's a word for it that's slipping my mind right now. No, to curate. That was like the word that Obama used in a speech. Of course, he was for freedom of speech, but that there needed to be a curating of things on the internet, which it seemed like a very subtle way of basically introducing censorship without calling it censorship. But that was all in reaction to something, and what it was in reaction to was still unfolding. So it's not as though it seems to me that we didn't see this stuff happening back in 2010, 2011, 2012, in part because these ideas weren't really getting out there and weren't really catching hold and weren't really gaining momentum.
Yeah, actually, good point, because one of the reasons Obama became president was because his campaign team were more adept at using social media. And so it was kind of, in a way, working for the left at that time. And then I think when other actors started to utilize it and weaponize social media for their ends, then it became problematic. And so this is what you're talking about, the this kind of nationalist upsurge and a lot of dissent and a lot of interest in things like conspiracy theories, all sorts of dissident narratives started to colonize social media, and then it wasn't fun anymore for big tech and the soft left.
Yeah, and I mean, a few years ago, they let these kinds of people have their little playpens and so forth, like like what today we would call the dissident right and other sort of dissident groups. It was either just kind of ignored or just sort of indulged because it was seen as just the fringe and it didn't really matter. And there was less censorship because there was more confidence that they were in control. And now I think there's less confidence that they're in control, and there's more of this kind of fear bordering on hysteria that they might not be able to retain control. And that is why they've clamped down. I mean, that's why I think we have to see it as not in isolation, but as part of a dynamic.
Would you see it as a reaction mainly to what happened in 2016 with these two what have been called populist uprisings, Brexit and Trump?
Yeah, I mean those were huge, and they're both not expected to happen, and they both happened. And I don't know, of course, the full story of all the social forces behind what helped each of them to happen, or anything like that. But we have seen. I know, Colin, you're in the UK right now. There's the most recent election.
Yes, I'm in the UK. I'm the person among the three of us who is in most danger of being arrested for anything I say tonight.
But that said, yeah, we've got the police state and the enforcement of the party line, and as we've seen it take place in the great UK and other places in the West that are part of the UK former empire, now Commonwealth, I suppose, like New Zealand or Canada or other places like that. But at the same time, the most recent election, was definitely a boon for pro-Brexit forces, in spite of the best efforts of all the correct, decent, upstanding, upper middle class, anti-Brexit, anti-Little England types. So in a way, this the wrong think continues to hold sway to a degree.
Yeah, I mean these kind of censorious trends and impulses, they have to be balanced against the opposite arguments, because if you overdo things, then that creates more of a backlash. I mean, the famous example of the Streisand effect: don't look at my house, and everybody goes looks at Barbara Streisand's house. And so when you try to shut things down, you've got to do it subtly. And I think with social media, there were probably a lot of people on the censorious left who were kind of very, very worried about how a lot of politically incorrect messages were starting to emerge. But big tech and the soft left, they had a sort of general commitment to the idea of free speech, which went back to the 1960s, when free speech used to be much more of a leftist cause against the more conservative establishment. And so to dismantle that kind of commitment to free speech, they needed something much more radical to push them in that direction. And when Trump and Brexit happened, they I think they panicked, and they started cracking down. I think probably they're doing a little bit too much, and it ultimately causes all sorts of problems for them, because once you start cracking down on some people, then inconsistencies obviously arise, because you'll somebody gets kicked off of Twitter for posting it's okay to be white, and then meanwhile you have rabid black nationalists or black Israelites ranting away about Jews, and they're not kicked off. But you have all these inconsistencies that rise up when you start to oppress like this. So people can focus on that and use that to discredit what you're doing. And there's all sorts of other things. People will also find other ways of, getting the message out. And we've seen this with, the alt-right in 2016, under the brilliant leadership of people like Richard Spencer and Mike Enoch, went towards this kind of hard Nazi signal and bullshit. Whereas, now we see relatively the same kind of pro-white message being delivered in a much more subversive and potent way by the Groyper movement, because they're not exaggerating or connecting the message to all sorts of extraneous toxic junk. And then also, once you start to kick people off various platforms, other platforms then start to pick up that energy. And we've seen that to some extent with Gab and with BitChute. And, whatever criticisms you may have of these new platforms, they're going to pick up energy. They're going to pick up audience from these censorship moves. And then what do you do there? Then you have to kind of go after those platforms. And then that just starts looking more and more like we're living in a version of Soviet Russia. And then at that point, it becomes very, very difficult for a lot of normies to actually ignore. And they start to think, hey, what the fuck's going on here? And, so these moves can sometimes be self-defeating. Censorship is quite a difficult business.
Right. Well, being in the UK, gauging the way things are right now, why do you think Boris Johnson was able to win the recent election so handily, uh, and why did Labour lose so hard? In spite of, again, all of the best and the brightest people pushing so hard against Brexit, trying to stop Brexit, the corporate elite, the managerial elites, and I'm not saying that Boris Johnson is necessarily going to do anything, isn't going to be a disappointment or anything like that. But I do know that he was not the preferred candidate of the, shall we say, the managerial elites. So, I think this is part of our conversation here. Like, we see this effort to control the internet, to control media, control social media, to censor wrong think wherever possible, and this fear bordering on hysteria. But still, the side that, at least appearance-wise, was the most opposed to all of these kinds of trends, the most conspicuously opposed, and the most vociferously pro-Brexit types won the day. So, would you say that that's a result of this dynamic that you're talking about? That the more that the harder they try to keep it all controlled, the more people see through it and want to go against it?
Well, with Brexit, Brexit is quite a complex thing. First of all, I'd say that the elites were not united on Brexit. A lot of people in the elites wanted to stay in the European Union for various reasons, but also a lot of people in the elites were skeptical. That's a lot of that's to do with the terms under which Britain entered the EU and the effects that membership had on our economy. One of the things about being a member of the European Union is we lost a lot of our manufacturing jobs to European countries like Germany, and later to companies relocating to cheaper labor markets in Eastern Europe. In return for that, Britain wanted more freedom for financial services. We haven't really got that. There's still all sorts of restrictions to Britain's financial services. Britain's financial service sector has a lot of concentrated political influence and power, especially through the Conservative Party. So it wasn't a case of the popular will overpowering the elites. That's not exactly what happened, although there was an important element of that in the equation. But also, I think the strength of Britain's anti-European feeling was actually more than was indicated by the referendum result. The referendum result was quite a close result. I think it was 52% to leave and 48% to remain. But that was after a campaign that involved a lot of media gaslighting. Most of the media supported remain. There were some elements of the media that supported leave as well, but it was more than 2/3 of the media was pushing remain. And then we had this very suspicious incident with an MP being assassinated in the UK. Setting aside the activities of the Irish Republican Army, this was the first political assassination in over 200 years. So it's not something that happens often in the UK. Due to the timing, which was like just a few days before the vote, that was a highly suspicious thing. So that probably influenced some people to vote against it. Also, there's a lot of inbuilt kind of small c conservatism. People were worried about Brexit from an economic point of view. They thought it might shake the boat, and it could cause some problems for their job personally. So people were a little bit reluctant to gamble on this change, and so that kind of slanted the results towards Remain. But underneath that, there was the resentment against the EU and against the abrogation of democracy that the EU represents. That was stronger than it appeared in the referendum. And so when moves were then made to try to derail Brexit in various ways, and this is a process that went on for 3 years. Remember, day after day, and there were a lot of very nefarious attempts to do this, and a lot of people who are not that particularly interested in politics, kind of the typical low information voters, they all started to notice what was going on. Maybe some of them were happy about these attempts to derail Brexit, but most people in Britain still have a sense of fair play, and they started to get not only fed up with the whole process, but they thought we have to go through with Brexit because it was a referendum and Leave won. And so the more they tried to push back against Brexit, the stronger it became. And Boris Johnson obviously recognized this as a major political opportunity. This is somebody who probably, under different circumstances, would have supported Remain. But because of the particular course his political career took, he ended up on the Leave side. And he saw this as a very, very convenient political opportunity for him. And so he grabbed it with both hands.
Right.
And the Labour Party, they basically tried to, ride two horses with one backside. And so that didn't go down too well with the voters. But, when all said and done, the Labour Party didn't do as badly as people are making out. Their vote count was down on last time, but it was higher than the previous 3 elections before that. So Labour 2019 got more votes than Labour 2005, 2010, and 2015. So what happened with the Labour vote? A lot of people, they went and voted, a lot of Labour voters who can't vote Tory for cultural and historical reasons, a lot of them went and voted for the Brexit Party. So in a lot of these northern seats where the Conservative Party managed to sneak in, it was because part of the Labour vote had moved over to the Brexit Party rather than all the way over to the Conservative Party.
Right.
So it's a kind of complicated picture, but none of these things are as simple as they are usually presented.
Sure, but generally, I think it's instructive insofar as if we're talking about these concurrent trends or divergent trends or trends that concomitant trends, really, one feeding the other, if my thesis is correct.
A lot of people draw parallels between what happened in Britain and what happened in America, and it's kind of natural to do that. There are some obvious parallels, and now people compare Johnson to Trump and so on, and because of what happened in the UK election, a lot of people are expecting Trump to do well in the presidential election in 2020. But there are very, very significant differences as well. Another reason Boris Johnson did very, very well is because the left side of the vote was split between 3 parties, because in Britain and Scotland, which used to be a Labour heartland, the SNP now dominate, whereas in England and Wales, you also had the Liberal Democrats who took a large part of the left-wing vote. And in some places, you even had the Green Party taking up some of the left-wing vote. So the left-wing vote was generally much more split than the right-wing vote, because most of the Brexit Party support collapsed into the Conservative Party. The Brexit Party stood down in Conservative-held seats, and they only contested Labour-held seats and helped to take votes away from Labour in those seats. So from that point of view, it's quite a complicated picture. And in America, ultimately, it's going to be a kind of 2-horse race between Trump and whoever the Democrats come up with. So I wouldn't expect Trump necessarily to do as well as Johnson did.
Oh yeah, no, there's no guaranteeing anything like that. But I think it's just instructive or interesting to look at the UK election in regard to the broader topic. Matt.
Anyway, shouldn't we be talking about something much more important, like same-sex marriage, which was a big thing in the 20 teens?
Well, that happened. I mean, there's been. We've seen a lot of trends of that sort that have pushed their way into legality, I guess, in the case of same-sex marriage, and the more visible trans rights and all this other pause type stuff. That definitely happened. I mean, that's part of the picture. That's part of the dynamic, I think, that we're talking about here, because these are the kinds of boutique liberal issues that they're favored by the upper middle class collegiate voters, and they've really taken the focus away, I think, in my estimation, from what used to be the more the stronghold of the left, which is the working class kind of voter, the working class kind of mentality, the class oriented, the union favoring types who would tend to be more of humbler roots and also more socially conservative.
Isn't our working class now in China?
Yeah, it could be said.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what's happened as well. And it's, again, every action has a reaction. I mean, I would say that the more conspicuous pushing of these kinds of things, not necessarily gay marriage, I guess that's become more generally accepted, but some of the more out there kind of ideas, like especially trans stuff and trans children stuff, I think these are still repellent to most people, and also like some of the more conspicuous anti-white stuff, I think that's still, people can still see a double standard when it's presented to them. And so this is the dynamic. I mean, as far as I see it, the elites are pushing these kinds of ideas, these kinds of notions. These are not grassroots. These are not things that are happening by themselves. These are things that are being.
Why? The question emerges: why do the elites have such a vested interest in gay people getting married or children changing their gender? Any thoughts, Matt?
You could definitely call the 10s the gayest decade on record, because the legalization of same-sex marriage was a big thing. But then we, have seen public sexuality devolve into all this weird fucking, cis this, trans that, trans otherkin, pronouns. We saw an aborted push to make pedophilia acceptable back in 2015. We've got trans, I'm not even sure how to fucking describe some of this stuff, male to female trans, female to male trans, pregnant men. It all suddenly became vogue during the 10s. And I note that it really ramped up during the second half of Obama's presidency. Like, first half of Obama's presidency wasn't too much different from the Bush years. It was a little more liberal, a little more sanctimonious, but didn't really change a whole lot. But then, like, starting in 2013, that's when everything changed. That's when all of a sudden all these Tumblrites started coming out of the woodwork, demanding acceptance for being whatever made-up sexuality they came up with in their heads. That was when we started seeing mass social shaming for anyone who didn't get with the program. And now we're at the end of the decade. We're at pregnant men and pedophiles trying to recast. I forget the exact term for it. It's like minor attracted person or minor attracted sexuality or some nonsense like that. That all became a thing in the 10s. Just borderline Sodom and Gomorrah stuff.
But it is a good question why they're pushing it, why they're promoting it. I mean, I don't have a definitive answer to that, but I do think it's being pushed and promoted artificially. I mean, I do think it, even though it's so conspicuous, I don't think it's something that common folk are down with. But just like in the Soviet Union, you know when to keep your mouth shut, and you know when it's prudent not to so much let everybody know how you feel about this, that, or the other thing, or to do so in a more
just to kind of interrupt you on that point. You said that the common people are not down with it, but there are at least two cases that spring to mind where they held referendums on gay marriage. I think in Ireland, was that last year or the year before, and also Australia. They both held referendums on accepting or legalizing gay marriage, and they both passed. And obviously, they only hold these referendums when they feel they can win, when people have been kind of culturally prepared.
Right.
But so there is a.
Well, sure.
I mean, there are some things which, if they put them to a referendum, people would obviously reject, connected to this kind of transgender sexuality, kind of this reconfiguration of sexuality, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there. I mean, obviously, the common folk are more down with things that they wouldn't have been down with 20 years ago, and I mean, there's been a successful propagandization of them to a degree, but also there's this dynamic that we keep coming back to, that if you push too hard, it produces this back. If you push too hard in one direction, then people start to see, wait, you're jamming all this stuff down our throats. You're trying to tell us that we can't be considered good people unless we believe in all of these things that are just patently ridiculous and perverse and obscene. Then that produces a backlash, and
yeah.
So that's the dynamic, and I mean, so
yeah, I get the feeling also that this acceptance of these various forms of transgenderism and new ways of looking at sexuality is a kind of proxy tolerance. It's kind of easy way to signal that you're a tolerant person. There's all sorts of interesting undercurrents in our society now. People are very confused. They're very angry. They're very bitter. They're very worried about the change in shape of society, and this is generating a lot of interest in social and political currents. And I think when you say that you're okay with gay people getting married, or with children expressing their true gender, inverted commas, then that's like a very low cost way of showing that you're a tolerant person. And probably why would you want to do that unless you're actually starting to feel intolerant about other things? So I think there's a lot of hidden intolerance in our society, and that this sexual tolerance might be partly connected to that in a kind of a very weird dialectical way.
So what is it that they're intolerant of, that they're compensating for?
Well, if you're going to be like, I think people are the thing that probably upsets people the most, and that they can't talk about the most, is changing demographics. And we've seen rapidly changing demographics in a lot of countries. America is inundated with illegal immigrants from south of the border, and Hispanics are a rising group, and you have a lot of shifting groups in the suburbs and the urban areas, and so there's a lot of racial and religious fear of the other, which is sometimes unjustified, of course, but often it is justified. We've seen this recent incident in New York, or I think it's New Jersey, where a black man went into a rabbi's house and stabbed 5 people. So there's all these problems welling up. In Europe, we have we have a large influx of people from various countries, from Eastern Europe because of the EU, from our former colonies. Some of them are now in the cabinet. We have a Muslim mayor of London. We have largely Afro-Caribbean black gangs going around stabbing each other every day in London. There's, people are feeling a lot of fear, a lot of resentment that they know they can't express because of hegemonic leftist ideas. And so they're starting to feel, I think they're starting to feel more and more intolerant, and they're looking for surreptitious ways to express their intolerance. But at the same time, they're feeling a lot of tolerance guilt. And so, I'm fine with gay people kissing on TV or whatever. That's the low-cost way of pretending that you're still a tolerant person. After all, the numbers of people we're talking about with gay marriage are very, very small. Transgender kids, again, it's a kind of a micro percentage. Being tolerant of those groups doesn't mean you have to go and live with them. You know what I mean? So, there's real tolerance and there's fake tolerance, and this is a kind of proxy tolerance, I feel.
So virtue signaling has a certain utility.
Well, it's a degenerate form of virtue signaling, yeah.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that maybe a good way to bring things to a head here is to actually ask Matt, because I'm interested in this question. You've recently started up your own publishing house, and of course you are republishing one of my books, as we've talked about in a prior podcast that was also posted at Affirmative Right. But just Matt, I'm curious to know your thoughts on the wider question of, in the midst of these, what we see going on right now, this growth of dissident thought on the one hand, and also this greater push for censorship and centralized control of ideas and deplatforming of intellectual heretics. Maybe this is a good time for you to put in a plug for your for
quick
Terror
plug.
House.
The second edition of the Columbine Pilgrim by Andy Nowicki, coming out January 10th, exclusively via Terror House Press at terrorhousepress.com. But yes,
Thank you for that.
I'm really, I'm doing the best I can, but I'm really just kind of pessimistic about it all. The growth of dissident right ideology and the truth is a good thing, but I've just watched over the past 3 years as censorship has increased and increased. The alt-tech alternatives to social media and payment processing have all fallen flat on their face for various reasons. Gab is a joke, BitChute is a joke. Then there's stuff like VidMe and FreeStarter that's been totally forgotten and abandoned. And I don't see any kind of movement from the government, which is really the only entity that's capable of solving this problem, to do anything. You've got Trump tweeting about how we're gonna closely monitor the censorship of patriots on Twitter and whatnot, which I think it kind of psychologically makes him a cuck. He's just gonna monitor from the corner as his supporters get raped. I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing what I can, and we're all doing what we can. But I just think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Maybe by the end of this decade, the internet and free expression will be wide open again. But for the interim, I just think censorship's going to get worse. It's definitely going to get really bad in 2020. Particularly if you look at, say, YouTube's new terms of service, Twitter's new terms of service going into effect on January 1st now says straight up that they can shadow ban you for any reason at any time. YouTube now reserves the right to delete your YouTube channel if they deem you commercially unviable. Now, keep in mind, this is after they raised the requirements for monetization last year to make it difficult to become monetized in the first place. Until there's some action from the U.S. government on this, I don't see things getting better.
Well, what are you say you're trying the best you can. You're doing what you can. What are you doing? What are you trying? What is Terror House all about?
Well, with Terror House, I'm trying to build a platform that is deplatforming resistant. We've done this through a number of ways. Number one, we have our own website, which we sell our own ebooks through, so we don't need Amazon. And not too long from now, I can't put a date on it, we're going to upgrade the website to sell books directly through the site, physical books. So you'll be able to order from us. It'll ship to you. It won't rely on Amazon. And our users have already kind of taken to this process. I can't release public sales figures, but with our first book, Letters from a Heartbroken Pervert, out now, Terror House Press. Go buy it, terrorhousepress.com. The majority of our paperback sales have not been through Amazon. They've been through our Aereo store, which is the platform we're currently using to directly sell books, which is a good thing. And I also see, as part of this deplatforming trend, I see a transition back from digital media towards physical media. Our paperback sales right now are much, much higher than our ebook sales. Part of this is because of, cachet. People want, a cool book, you put it on your coffee table, brag about it to your friends, take pictures on Instagram. But also it's because, you can't censor a physical book. Kindle, Amazon, if they want to blink something out on your Kindle, they can just do it by changing a couple lines of code. But if you've purchased a physical book, Amazon is not going to send a drone to your house to physically burn it. So That's the big transition I anticipate seeing. We're going to see a move away from traditional social media towards ways of getting information out that are more difficult to censor, such as physical mailing lists, physical books, email lists, and the like.
That kind of dovetails into the predictions portion of the podcast. We're going to see in the publishing world in the 20s, the Roaring Twenties that we're entering now. We're going to see a regrowth of interest in actual physical publishing works as opposed to electronic works, which has been sort of the trend of the last few years.
It's a bit like the samizdat culture in the Soviet Union, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, the samizdat, that was a kind of handmade copy that they used to smuggle between dissidents, and it's not quite as extreme as that, but it's a kind of partial return to that. Yes,
and although it's not, we're not living under the same kind of oppression in the West that the Soviet Union was. There is a like we said, like you and I said in our prior podcast, when we were talking about our deplatforming from Facebook. There is still this very comparable or analogous trend, similar to what you had in the Soviet Union, where certain things were party line, and you had to believe, you had to publicly show that you adhered to these certain ideas, but privately you knew it was bullshit. And I think that we have the same kind of dynamic going on right now. And
it's even worse. It's even worse in a way, because at least in the Soviet Union, even though they were obviously wrong about a lot of things, they were censoring people with good intentions. They thought that these ideas were a threat to the greater good of the people. Whereas now we're actually censoring people who are writing things or publishing ideas that are designed to ensure the greater good of the people. You know what I mean? So the censorship system is in place to enforce things like gay supremacism, dysgenic female empowerment, and racial cucking, which are all very, very negative and self-destructive trends.
And mass immigration.
In the Soviet Union, they were just censoring people because they thought they were going to. They're trying to undermine a society that was set up to promote the greater good of the proletariat. Sure.
I mean, there were differences. There was no mass immigration. There was no promotion of deviant sexuality, and so a lot of things were different. But analogously speaking, there are still similarities.
I think. But we've hit new depths with what we're actually attempting to do in the West with censorship.
Right. So, Colin, what do you think? What are your predictions, if any, for the Roaring Twenties?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting possibilities. I mean, predictions sounds like such a grandiloquent word, as if you are gifted with prophetic vision into the future. So, but I prefer to talk about possibilities, and one possibility is the effect that Brexit will have on the rest of the EU, because it looks like Boris Johnson he's got a strong House of Commons behind him. He's got some very strong vested economic interests that he wants to push vis-a-vis the European Union, and so he's going to push for quite a hard Brexit. And he's going to, of course, the EU is losing a lot of money because Britain is leaving. Britain was a net payer into the EU of billions of pounds a month. Now, the EU is going to struggle to balance its books, and that's going to make it much more difficult for the EU to impose unity, because a lot of the unity in the EU was bribed unity. A lot of countries like Hungary and Poland, which have never been happy with the kind of social policies of the EU. They mainly are pro-EU because of the gibs they get from the EU. And so that's going to, there's going to be a lot less gibs from the EU. So some of the other outlying provinces of this German empire that we call the EU will maybe think about breaking off. Italy, there's a good chance Italy could do that. In Italy, Salvini and some of the other nationalist parties are building quite a strong bloc that could seize power. It would be very hard to see how that kind of Italy could fit together with Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron's France. So we could see the disintegration of the EU. That would be something to look for.
Yeah. Do you think it gives strength to other European countries like France? Could Le Pen get elected in the 20s?
Well, I thought Le Pen would have got elected last time, but they managed to create this this kind of weird astroturf candidate, Macron, who kind of sucked up all that dissident energy and kind of neutralized Le Pen. And so I think it'll be more difficult to stop Le Pen next time. Although they might still manage to do that in some way. In Germany too, I think the AfD will continue to mount a challenge. But I think the main point at which the EU might come unraveled would be Italy, because there, as we know about the Italians are a lot more volatile, and they're quite prepared to vote for what we in the Anglo countries might consider extremists. And so I could see a Salvini administration coming in, falling out with the EU, telling the EU to go fuck itself, and so on. And if that happens, and a few other things happen, that will also give energy to these, dissident right groups like the AfD and Marine Le Pen's group. Anyway, so those groups will then get energy from that kind of chaos. And historically, people will look back and say that Britain leaving the EU kind of kick-started a lot of processes. Now, most of these big events, even though they don't always work out the way you might hope, they do sometimes have unexpected consequences. So, another thing that might happen because of Brexit, Britain is a dysgenic country. We have a birth rate of really about 1.5, around about there, a bit higher thanks to various immigrant groups, but it's a dysgenic country. So we actually need immigration to maintain our economy at the level it is at and to grow it. And we've been vampirically sucking new population from the EU, and that's been very easy to assimilate population, hard-working Eastern Europeans who look like us. And because we've now left the EU, we're going to probably bring in more immigration from the third world. I think there'll be a kind of attempt to filter that to some degree through a kind of what's called a points-based system. That's going to mean a lot of kind of high IQ people from certain Asian countries will be brought in, but that's going to basically cause a lot of social disruption, and it's going to increase the amount of fear and discomfort that ordinary British people have. And so I think that could also lead to kind of a new surge of ethno-nationalism in Britain. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a new party, probably a party like For Britain, which is kind of quite well organized, quite sussed about how the British political system works, building up a lot of support in some areas.
Is that Morrissey's party?
Yes, that's Morrissey's party, and they kind of go hard on things like gay rights and feminism and animal rights as a kind of convenient moral cover for a more what is essentially an ethno-nationalist surge.
Well, that reflects a trend that I just find really, really fascinating, which is that all you have to do to be called far right is to be, these days, if you're a European political party, is to be in favor of immigration restriction. That's it. You could be left wing in every other way, but if you're for immigration restriction, then they call you far right.
Yeah, but there are also interesting trends on the left in favor of a more kind of immigration restrictionist approach. I think there's a new party which is being founded as an alternative to the Labour Party. They are trying to move away from this kind of the leftist identity politics and towards a more kind of working class traditional British politics. And there's a move in the Labour Party called Blue Labour, which has some of those elements as well. I don't know if you know Spiked. It's an online magazine. I often see it on Twitter. It used to be Marxism Today, But several years ago, they decided to rebrand it, and Spiked was a very big supporter of Brexit, and they tend to side with the white working class in a lot of issues. Of course, they're trying to avoid some of the kind of toxic forms of nationalism, which look like they're driven more by hatred than love of your own people. But there are a lot of moves on the left towards kind of rethinking left-wing ideas, because the reason Jeremy Corbyn lost was mainly because his party wasn't nationalist enough. If it had been a little bit more Brexit friendly, if it had been a little bit less in favour of open borders, it would have done a lot better. And so a lot of these left-wingers who are really unhappy that Corbyn lost, and because the economic ideas won't have a chance to be enacted, they're now starting to think maybe we should reconsider this kind of pro-gay, pro-feminist, pro-immigrant left wing that's more or less being co-opted by corporate capitalism. So you could actually see another interesting trend where the left kind of wakes up to the realization that it's veered towards these kind of weird kind of identity politics based on gender and race and being non-white and promoting white guilt, and then deciding that that's not where the left should be, and then trying to kind of move back to its traditional base. I think there will be a trend like that. I'm not sure how powerful that will be, because the left is now mainly run by these kind of incredibly woke people who are, kind of emotionally and psychologically tied to their perverse political opinions.
Yeah, emotionally incontinent people. Since I'm the only one of us who's living in the United States right now, I'll just say my prediction for the Roaring Twenties is just I anticipate ever greater fragmentization. I anticipate more states against states, more secessionist movements afoot. I'm not going to say the United States will cease to be the United States by the time the 20s are over, but I bet there will be a lot of movement towards balkanization of these, formerly united, now not so united states. That might be a whole nother issue that, it's related to the things we've talked about, but I think it's maybe a uniquely American question. What's going to happen here? Because it just seems like unity is untenable right now, unless there's some massive threat from without, that somehow brings us all together, unites us all against a common threatening enemy. And maybe they'll push that. Maybe we'll see some other. So maybe we'll see something like that happen. Some all too convenient, terrorist attack linked to, I don't know, China or somebody like that. Maybe who knows what nefarious planning is taking place, because somebody's got to see that this trend is afoot. That there's not much holding these United States together right now. There's so much that we are. We are fragmenting. The next election is going to be, it's going to be hellish, just like the last one was, as far as all of the lead up, all of the acrimony that will go into it, and then people disputing the results and whatever the results are, and it's just going to be really, really ugly. And so that's my prediction. Is just unless there's some galvanizing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, like PNAC said, and back in the 90s, that's what we need, is a new Pearl Harbor. Maybe there will be a new Pearl Harbor that'll make us all be united again, conveniently. But absent that happening, I see greater balkanization taking place in the United States, and progressing towards who knows what in the 2020s. So is that where we should maybe end this conversation?
Well, no, I want to hear Matt's take on where America is headed, because I have absolutely no idea.
I've been out of the U.S. for a while, so I'm, take my predictions with a grain of salt. I pretty much agree with Andy. Things are just going to get worse, and they're just going to get more. Let me be careful how I word this. Things are going to get more violent, not just in the U.S., but in the world. We're at the the 50-year cycle of violence. We're right at the stage where things just start kind of get violent again, like it did back in the 70s. And I do have one thing I want to point out. You have everyone who's screaming, running around like chicken littles, like, oh, the U.S. is going to become a one-party state. Democrats are going to have a permanent majority because of changing demographics. That's not going to happen because the U.S. is becoming like Brazil in terms of ethnic muddled confusion. Brazil is a two-party state. It's just that the two parties are communists and fascists. So, along with the balkanization, I'm going to anticipate more political polarization as the two sides just become further and further apart. The left is going to go further left. The right is going to go further right.
So we've got a new Bolsonaro to look forward to in the United States.
Something like that
in the next few years, but also whoever the left-wing equivalent is of that, what they've got in Brazil right now. Yeah, that's probably going to happen too.
So what about the 2020 election? Will Trump get in for 4 more years of tweeting?
I think Trump is going to win re-election easily because the Democratic nominee is going to be Joe Biden. It's going to be Joe Biden, or it's going to be, in the event of a contested convention, it's going to be Hillary Clinton again as a unity candidate. Everyone's been pretending like the Democratic presidential primary is a race. It's not. Biden's had a huge lead over everyone from the start because he has near monolithic support among blacks. And really, they're the ones who determine who becomes the nominee. Yeah, what the opinions of whiteys in New Hampshire and Vermont, they don't matter. What matters is what black people think, and they're pretty much all voting Biden because Biden was Obama's Veep, so he's got that that cool factor working for him. They're not interested in Elizabeth Warren, who's been dropping in the polls. They're not interested in Sanders. They're definitely not interested in Buttigieg or whatever the gay dude with the name that no one can pronounce. They don't care. They're going to vote for Biden. So regardless of what happens in like Iowa or New Hampshire, as soon as the states with large minority populations would start voting, which is almost all of them, Biden's just going to win each of them in a landslide. And Biden's going to lose because Biden just represents continuity. Biden. The people who are enthusiastic about Biden, are people who think that the Trump years are just some horrible aberration, and they want like an Obama-type candidate to just bring things back to the way they were before 2016. But the problem is that the majority of the population doesn't want that. I mean, that's how Trump got in the first place. Sanders would have more of a shot if he won the nomination, aside from, the CIA hitting him with the heart attack gun. But Biden's going to get it, or Hillary's going to get it, and Trump will win again.
Yeah, there's just one thing. If Trump goes in on these corruption allegations about Biden's son, that might derail things possibly. But even if that happens, whoever else comes in will lose to Trump. I don't really see anybody who can really stand up to Trump at the moment from the Democrat side.
Yeah, I agree. I agree Trump will probably win 2020, but I think it's a mistake to think that so much rests upon who will win and who will lose in 2020. I just don't. I think that the larger trends will continue to unfold regardless, and that's what we have to keep our eyes on.
Yeah, I think the main trend, the main important trend will be that I think China will continue to rise relative to America. America will continue to go into this managed decline. So I think geopolitically we'll see much more of a kind of multipolar world. So yeah, I think it'll be quite an interesting decade. Might actually be quite a good decade because you'll have a return to a lot of healthy values because people will need to have these values to actually survive and to have functioning nations and economies.
Yeah, that's I guess one of the virtues of a chaotic time is it makes you have to hold to that which is true and good in order to prevail or even survive and hopefully prevail.
Yeah, and also I think there'll be a lot of technological things going on. I mean, I think we'll see more and more automation.
Oh yeah, that's true.
That's going to hit a lot of people. We'll see a lot of this kind of IoT, Internet of Things, taken over. There'll be like computers in everything. and the Chinese will control a lot of that. So, in some ways, it's sort of I have quite an optimistic outlook, but also there is a kind of dark side to the next decade as well.
Do you think we're going to see driverless cars? I keep hearing about that. I just have a hard time imagining it.
Yeah, I mean, we have the technology already. It's just bringing the costs down so they can roll it out. And what they'll do is they'll probably, introduce it on long-haul trucks between various depots. A truck on a freeway is quite a simple thing. You're driving in a relatively straight line, and you don't have to make too many complicated decisions. And so that can quite easily be automated. And a lot of public transport systems can be automated as well. So I think they'll say that this is necessary because it's good for the environment or something like that. Environmentalism is also quite an interesting trend, because we've seen how this has become almost like a kind of religion with a lot of people. And I think it can also be put to a nationalist use. You could say that, to protect the environment, we have to reduce immigration, and we have to reduce overpopulation, things like that, because, this is something that environmentalism is not addressing yet, the kind of population pressures that are developing in some parts of the world, and the effect of mass immigration, and the kind of economy that requires more and more immigrants. So automation and environmentalism could turn into very effective nationalist forces that help to protect certain nations from, mass immigration and colonization.
Well, we'll see how it all unfolds, or we won't, if we die. But if we're alive until 2030, we'll see how it all unfolds, and it'll be interesting to listen back to this podcast in 2030. And
see,
also,
I think you might see Kanzuk.
What's that?
Kanzuk is Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK. This is an idea that now that Britain's left the European Union, we can strengthen our ties with our traditional colonies in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. What was formerly known as the White Commonwealth in the old days, and of course that term is no longer so appropriate. But there are lots of cultural similarities and family ties between those countries, and also there are still, despite 50 years in the EU, there are also a lot of economic ties, and so there's a lot of support in those countries for freedom of movement between those countries, for allowing people to come and go as they please. And so I think there could be something along those lines. Britain and Australia, New Zealand, and Canada could enter into some agreements to make it easier for their citizens to move around and interact with one another.
Just be sure the citizens aren't returning ISIS fighters.
Of course, any system will be abused, but I think it would be kind of quite nice if they brought that back and at least made an effort to administer it properly.
Interesting. All right. Anything else? Anybody else want to add anything before we close this conversation?
Yeah, go buy the Columbine Pilgrim by Andy Nowicki, second edition Terror House, January 10th, terrorhousepress.com.
Yes, I second that. I heartily second that emotion. Yeah, very good. Well, like I said, it'll be interesting to see where in 10 years how much we were right, how much we were wrong. I hope we're wrong about at least some of this, because a lot of this is pretty damn grim. But that's the age we're living in, I'm afraid. So we'll bring things to a close there. So I'll just close this conversation by wishing both of you gentlemen a happy New Year, happy 2020.
Same to you, Andy.
And same to all.
Same here. Yeah.
Thank you, and same to all of our listeners. And on that note, this is Andy Nowicki with Colin Liddell and Matt Forney signing off for another Affirmative Right Roundtable podcast.